In the summer of 1867, just outside Sedalia, Missouri, 8-year-old Timothy Caldwell became the center of one of the most disturbing medical case studies in Midwestern history. Dr. Samuel Harding, the only physician in the region, documented his experiences in 3 leather-bound journals describing a child whose behavior defied every known principle of 19th century medicine. Timothy seemed like any ordinary boy, polite, soft-spoken, and obedient, but behind his pale blue eyes lurked something unnerving. Over 6 months, 3 people died under unusual circumstances, and dozens of animals were found lifeless near the Caldwell farm. 11 individuals, all connected to Timothy in some way, would ultimately be linked to the escalating unease gripping the community. The official records were sealed for over a century. But what has since emerged about Timothy Caldwell challenges everything we thought we knew about childhood innocence and the origins of evil. Before the terror began, there was only tragedy. Missouri, still reeling from the Civil War, was filled with grief, and the Caldwell farm was no exception. James Caldwell died at the Battle of Wilson's Creek in 1861, and his wife Martha succumbed to consumption in the harsh winter of 1865, leaving their eldest son Thomas to inherit a crumbling legacy. When word arrived that Thomas's brother William had died in Andersonville prison, leaving behind a widow and young son, Thomas took in his nephew Timothy, more out of necessity than compassion. Thomas was a hardened man, and his wife Sarah, bitter from years of childlessness, greeted the boy's arrival with cold practicality. Timothy came in the spring of 1866, carrying nothing but a cloth bag and an unsettling stillness. Small for his age, with pale skin and cropped blonde hair, he spoke little of his past, only that his father had been a soldier. His mother died coughing blood, and he had briefly lived with neighbors. What struck adults most was his unwavering politeness and tireless work ethic. He never complained, never disobeyed, and never strayed from his chores. Dr. Harding met Timothy during a supply trip to town and immediately sensed something was off. Though the boy was perfectly well-mannered, his gaze unsettled the doctor, too steady, too intense, as if he were the one doing the examining. Neighbors took notice as well. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, whose farm bordered the Caldwells, frequently saw Timothy toiling in the fields from sunup to sundown without pause. Even her chickens grew agitated in his presence, huddling and squawking when he neared. The first death came in August 1866. 5-year-old Mary Fletcher, the blacksmith's daughter, was found drowned in Willow Creek. Timothy himself brought the news, showing up at the Fletcher's door with wet clothes and a calm but urgent tone. He led the searchers directly to the body, providing eerily precise details about her appearance and surroundings. When asked how he came upon the scene, he claimed he was searching for a lost calf. The child's memory was flawless, his description clinical. Dr. Harding was unsettled, but had no evidence of wrongdoing. The family accepted Timothy's help as a kindness, and at the funeral, he played the part of the grieving child well, except as Mrs. Patterson later noted, his eyes never wept, only watched. The second death followed weeks later. Henrik Larson, a retired logger and beekeeper, was found at the foot of Devil's Bluff with a broken neck. Timothy again discovered the body, spotting Henrik's hat, snagged in a bush. He theorized that the old man had been stung by bees and fallen in panic. But the hive above was untouched, and a cluster of dead bees lay only around the body, not scattered along the presumed fall path. It didn't add up. Yet again, Timothy's explanation was plausible enough to avoid suspicion. Then came September. 6-year-old Jacob Mills vanished in the woods. Timothy joined the search, demonstrating surprising endurance and knowledge of the terrain. On the fourth day, he led Jacob's father to a hidden well, claiming to have heard crying. Jacob was barely alive, but died soon after. Dr. Harding was disturbed by how Timothy behaved during the vigil, sitting quietly, eyes fixed on the dying boy as if studying him. There was no emotion, only fascination. After Jacob's death, Harding revisited the well. It had been expertly concealed, covered with brush, arranged too neatly to be random. The implication was chilling. Someone had placed the boy there and hidden the well deliberately. Harding could no longer ignore what his instincts told him. Timothy Caldwell was no ordinary child. From that day forward, the doctor began keeping detailed records, determined to uncover the truth behind the pale-eyed boy who brought death wherever he went. If Dr. Harding's instincts were right, then Timothy Caldwell wasn't just an odd child, he was a threat to everyone around him. But suspicion alone couldn't save a community. What Harding lacked was proof. And that proof was elusive, because Timothy was, by every outward measure, the very picture of a well-raised boy. He sat through church services without fuss, bowed his head during prayers, worked harder than most grown men, and treated every adult he met with unfailing courtesy. More crucially, he always had a reasonable explanation for being present when tragedy struck, looking for a calf near the creek where Mary Fletcher drowned, taking the road home when he discovered Henrik Larsson's hat, volunteering to help find Jacob Mills like any concerned neighbor might. Yet Harding had seen this kind of mask before. During the war, he'd treated soldiers who killed not from duty, but from something colder, men who felt nothing as they pulled triggers or plunged bayonets into the enemy. They could describe horrific acts in calm, detached tones. Their eyes stayed dry even when the ground ran red. And that same eerie detachment lived in Timothy Caldwell, determined to learn more. Harding began a quiet investigation in October 1866. Under the guise of medical visits, he made his rounds through the area, asking questions and listening for patterns. What emerged was chilling. Livestock on farms near the Caldwells had started dying at an alarming rate, not from disease, but strange, isolated incidents that defied explanation. Chickens with perfectly broken necks, pigs with wounds that seemed precise, rather than random horses crippled by sudden, unexplained lameness. One neighbor, Mrs. Elelanina Patterson, confided that she'd lost 17 chickens in just 2 months. The way they were found, always in the morning, always intact except for a snapped neck, troubled her deeply. Her husband blamed foxes, but she had never seen any tracks or signs. When Harding examined the birds himself, he noticed the deaths were unnaturally clean, as if done by someone who understood exactly how to kill with minimal effort. Other neighbors had similar stories. James Wickham's calves had died in what he called freak accident strangulations and entrapments that seemed almost staged. His prized bull had broken a leg in a dry ditch. In nearly every case, Timothy had been seen nearby shortly before the incident. Polite as ever, waving as he passed, always alone. Back at the Caldwell farm, Dr. Harding paid closer attention. Timothy never missed a visit. He lingered quietly in the background, watching Harding's examinations of his aunt and uncle with keen interest. And then came the questions. How did Harding know when someone was really dead? Could someone look dead, but still be alive? Timothy said he wanted to be prepared to help in an emergency, which was logical given the farm's isolation. But his tone, casual, detached, sent a chill through the doctor. More troubling were his deeper inquiries. Timothy wanted to know how long it took people to die, how different wounds affected the body, what signs to watch for what a person could survive. Harding tested him by feeding him incorrect information, false symptoms, bogus diagnoses, and Timothy never argued. But Harding could tell he absorbed everything, sorting facts from lies with unsettling ease. Timothy's fascination deepened when Harding spoke of battlefield surgeries. Most children would flinch at descriptions of severed limbs and torn flesh. Not Timothy. He listened in rapt silence, then asked how much the soldiers bled, how many screamed, whether the pain was worse before or after the cutting started. These weren't the questions of a scared child. They were the cool, calculated inquiries of someone studying death up close. By November, Harding had nearly filled 2 journals. What emerged was a portrait of a child with an adult's comprehension of mortality, but none of the empathy that should come with it. Timothy wasn't curious in the innocent way of a child. He was clinical, methodical, and disturbingly observant. But journals weren't evidence, and Harding knew that without something concrete, no one would believe him. Not about a boy so polite, so hardworking, so perfectly behaved. And yet, in his gut, Harding felt certain Timothy Caldwell was not merely a boy touched by tragedy. He was the source of it. The turning point came unexpectedly when Thomas Caldwell injured his back during the fall harvest and was confined to bed. His condition required daily medical attention, giving Dr. Harding the opportunity to observe the Caldwell household up close and engage Timothy in longer, more probing conversations. What Harding uncovered during these visits shattered any lingering hope that Timothy might simply be a troubled child shaped by grief. The boy calmly revealed information that implied months, if not years, of calculated cruelty. Through careful questioning and subtle observation, Harding discovered that Timothy had been conducting experiments on living creatures. Timothy mentioned a cave he used for solitude, a place he claimed helped him think. Harding visited the location and was horrified by what he found. Inside was a neatly arranged display of animal bones, primitive surgical tools made from repurposed farm equipment, and a series of meticulously drawn illustrations. These drawings, unsettlingly detailed and executed with surprising skill, depicted various stages of mutilation and dissection. Accompanying each image were methodical notes written in Timothy's tidy handwriting. The annotations described animal reactions to specific injuries, how long they remained conscious when they stopped making noise, how much they struggled. One drawing of a rabbit read, "Subject remained conscious for approximately 10 minutes after removal of eyes. Vocalizations decreased gradually. Movement ceased after application of pressure to throat." But it wasn't just animals. The most disturbing sketches showed human figures, including unmistakable likenesses of Mary Fletcher Henrik Larson and Jacob Mills. Each image was paired with speculative notes on human anatomy and descriptions of suffering. The drawing of Jacob depicted him in the well, complete with observations on the physical effects of dehydration and exposure. These weren't just renderings of people Timothy had known. These were post-mortem analyses, suggesting he had not only orchestrated their deaths, but studied the outcomes like scientific data. Dr. Harding realized the supposed accidents and misfortunes around the community weren't coincidences or freak events. They were the result of deliberate experiments. And now the experiments had moved from animals to people. But this horrifying evidence presented a grim problem. The cave had been discovered without consent, making the findings inadmissible to any legal body. Worse still, no one in their right mind would believe that an 8-year-old boy had the capability or the intention to commit calculated murder. The medical and legal frameworks of 1867 simply had no language for psychopathy or sociopathy in children. To most, such behavior in someone so young was unimaginable. Harding knew that if he brought his findings to the authorities, he risked not only ridicule, but the very real possibility that Timothy would be dismissed as a misunderstood orphan. The boy would be protected, pitied, and eventually released. And people would keep dying. With time running out, Harding chose to confront Timothy directly. During his next visit, he asked the boy to accompany him to check the livestock in the distant pasture. Once they were alone, Harding calmly explained what he had found in the cave. Timothy didn't react with fear, denial, or anger. Instead, he listened quietly occasionally, nodding in agreement with Harding's conclusions. When the doctor finished, Timothy looked him squarely in the eye and said, "You're not going to tell anyone." It wasn't a question, it was a confident, unshakable statement. Dr. Harding asked, "Why wouldn't I?" Timothy gave him a knowing smile, the first genuine expression Harding had ever seen from him. "Because no one would believe you, and because you're curious about what I'll do next." He was right. Harding knew his reputation would be destroyed if he made accusations based on a child's drawings. But Timothy had also unearthed something deeper, a reluctant, almost shameful fascination Harding felt as a man of science. He was staring into the mind of what might be an entirely new category of human being. When asked how long he'd been doing this, Timothy answered without hesitation, "Since I was 5, maybe earlier. I started with insects, then mice, then bigger things." As if reciting a school lesson, he added, "It's interesting to see how different animals react to the same treatments. And the people who died, they were experiments too. I wanted to see if people react the same way as animals. Mostly they do. But they understand what's happening. That makes it more interesting." Then came the most chilling revelation. When Dr. Harding asked what Timothy intended to do next, the boy took his time to consider. "I need to find out what happens when you hurt someone who trusts you completely," he said at last. Someone who wouldn't suspect anything until it was too late. The implication was unmistakable. Timothy planned to kill his aunt and uncle, people who had taken him in, raised him, trusted him. Harding realized he had only days, maybe hours, before the boy followed through. That same night, he rode to Sedalia and made his way to Sheriff William Crawford's office. The question was no longer whether Timothy Caldwell was dangerous. It was whether anyone would believe it in time. Sheriff William Crawford, a man shaped by the brutal pragmatism of the battlefield, wasn't one to entertain wild accusations, especially not against a child. But his years of service had also trained him to recognize when a situation demanded action, no matter how strange. After reviewing the drawings, the notes from the cave, and hearing Dr. Harding recount Timothy's confession and intent to kill his aunt and Uncle Crawford, didn't argue. He looked at the sketches in silence. The precision of the anatomical renderings unsettling, even for a former soldier. "We can't arrest a boy based on pictures and suspicions," he said slowly. "But if he tries anything, we'll be ready." Together, Crawford and Harding devised a plan. Harding would visit the Caldwell farm, as usual, under the guise of delivering pain medicine for Thomas's injury. In reality, he'd administer a sedative strong enough to keep both Thomas and Sarah unconscious, but stable, preventing Timothy from acting too quickly. Meanwhile, Crawford would position trusted deputies around the property men he had led through battle, handpicked for their nerves and loyalty. But when Harding arrived the next morning, the farm was already too quiet. The normal chorus of mourning animals was gone, replaced by a heavy stillness that made his skin prickle. Timothy stood in the doorway, still as a statue, his pale eyes locked on Harding. His sleeves were rolled up, and his hands were recently scrubbed too thoroughly for ordinary farm chores. "Good morning, Dr. Harding," Timothy said, his voice polite but laced with something electric, something eager. "I've been waiting for you." Inside, Harding found Thomas and Sarah lying in bed, seemingly asleep. But as he examined them, he noted their shallow breathing and gray pallor. "What did you give them?" he asked quietly, not turning from the bed. "Just some herbs I found in the woods," Timothy replied carefully, choosing his words. "Some of them have very useful properties." Harding's pulse quickened. The couple was alive but heavily sedated, rendered helpless with calculated precision. Timothy had drugged them to clear the stage for what he saw as his next act. "They won't wake up for several hours," Timothy said matter-of-factly. "That should give us plenty of time to talk." And then the boy talked. What followed was less confession and more lecture. Timothy described his murders with the analytical detachment of a professor walking Harding through his methods and what he'd learned from each. Mary Fletcher's death had taught him that drowning wasn't immediate. "Everyone thinks they just slip under," he said casually. "But it's not like that. There's panic, gasping. I had to hold her down for almost 3 minutes. Harding felt frozen numb with horror." Timothy went on. With Henrik Larsson, he explained brute force wouldn't work. So he'd rigged the cliff-captured bees and triggered a panic. He backed right over the edge, just like I planned. Timothy's eyes sparkled with pride. The fall killed him instantly. Then came Jacob Mills. Jacob was different, Timothy said with a hint of reverence. "I didn't want him to die fast. I wanted to see how the body responds to slow decline." He had lured Jacob with a lie, baby raccoons in the woods. After helping him into the abandoned well, he'd covered the entrance and returned daily, offering only enough water to prolong the boy's suffering. "I visited him for 4 days," Timothy said, his voice calm. "He cried a lot the first day. After that, not so much." Dr. Harding realized the truth. Timothy wasn't speculating about future experiments. He had already carried them out. And now he was escalating. The boy's calm, detailed account left no doubt he was preparing for something more. Something worse. Timothy had mastered the suffering of animals. He had studied the deaths of strangers. Now he wanted to hurt someone who trusted him. Someone whose betrayal would deepen the experiment. He was done with distance. He wanted intimacy. And the next intended victims were lying unconscious in the next room. Harding had all the confirmation he needed. Timothy Caldwell was not a child in crisis. He was a predator evolving. And now it was time to act. Outside the farmhouse, Sheriff Crawford and his men waited for the signal. What happened next would decide whether the community of Sedalia could be saved from its most unnatural terror, or whether the story of Timothy Caldwell would end in even more blood. When Dr. Harding directly asked Timothy what he planned to do to his aunt and uncle, the boy smiled a broad, unsettling smile that revealed just how far his plans had evolved. "That's where you come in," Dr. Harding Timothy replied. Everyone before didn't know what was happening until it was too late. "But you understand, that makes you perfect for something new." As he spoke, he began collecting tools around the room. Rope, a heavy candlestick, knives from the kitchen, gathering them, not with panic, but with the calm, deliberate movements of a surgeon preparing for a procedure. Timothy's voice remained even, almost excited. He laid out his plan as if describing an academic experiment. "I want to see what happens when someone who knows they're going to die tries to protect others. Will you die for them? Will you fight? Or will you run and leave them behind?" Realizing the conversation was over and the danger now immediate, Dr. Harding drew the pistol hidden in his medical bag and ordered the boy to step away from the weapons. Timothy didn't flinch. Instead, he studied the weapon like a curious student. "A Navy Colt, isn't it 6 shots? But you've got 6 people to protect. That makes things difficult." Timothy's insight cut deep. He not only recognized the weapon, but accurately counted every potential life Dr. Harding might need to defend. And worse, he was right, Harding had no good options. As the boy approached his uncle's unconscious body with a length of rope, Dr. Harding intervened. The struggle was immediate, brutal, and terrifying. Though smaller, Timothy was agile, practiced, and armed. He slashed Harding's arm with a concealed blade, but the doctor managed to disarm him, only for Timothy to produce another knife hidden in his clothing. It was then that the sheriff's men burst through the back door, alerted by the noise. Deputy Mitchell restrained Timothy as Harding tended to Thomas and Sarah, both alive, but still deeply unconscious. In the corner of the room, bruised and bleeding Timothy sat with an expression not of defeat, but of curiosity, watching the aftermath like a scientist observing test results. "You can't prove anything," he said coldly as the deputies tied him. "No one will believe a child could do all that." Sheriff Crawford, staring at the boy with undisguised revulsion, replied, "Maybe not. But we don't need to prove everything. Trying to kill your own family. That's enough." Timothy smiled again. "You won't hang me. I'm too young, too interesting. Someone will want to study me." Aftermath. A legal and ethical dilemma. Timothy was half right. The attempt on his aunt and uncle's lives, witnessed by 3 deputies and confirmed by Dr. Harding, was enough to ensure he wouldn't walk free. But the deeper truth, the months of calculated cruelty, the orchestrated deaths, the scientific experiments on humans and animals, none of it could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. When Sheriff Crawford presented the cave drawings and notes to county prosecutors, they were dismissed as the ramblings of a disturbed child. Legal minds insisted that Timothy's exposure to the trauma of losing his parents explained everything. The community's string of deaths was written off as coincidence, misfortune, and Timothy's unfortunate presence at the wrong time. But attempted murder could not be explained away. Still, the legal system had no precedent for a case like this. Timothy was only 8. He was too young for criminal trial under Missouri law, but no one believed he belonged in an orphanage or reform school either. The idea of placing him with another family was unthinkable. And so, after weeks of debate and correspondence with mental health experts from cities as far as Boston and Philadelphia, a compromise was reached. Institutionalization and study. Timothy Caldwell was remanded to the Missouri State Hospital for the Insane in Fulton. There, alienists, the era's term for early psychiatrists, would study him, attempt treatment, and ensure he remained isolated from the public. No one was happy with the outcome. Prosecutors wanted a trial. Defense attorneys argued no 8-year-old could be held responsible for such acts. And the people of Sedalia, they simply wanted to forget the name Timothy Caldwell. Closing reflection. Timothy's fate did not end with a hanging or a trial. He became, as he predicted, an object of study, a case that would echo in legal and medical circles for decades. His name would vanish from public records, sealed under medical privacy laws, and local history would reduce the events to whispers and warnings. But Dr. Harding never forgot. In his final journal entry before retiring from medicine, he wrote, "We thought we understood childhood. We thought we understood evil. Timothy Caldwell taught me that we understood neither. If this story left you haunted, share it with someone who craves the dark mysteries that history prefers to forget. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that chill, disturb, and linger in the mind. Because Timothy Caldwell was only one chapter in a much deeper, darker book. And the next story may already be unfolding." The legacy of Timothy Caldwell, from patient to predator. The psychiatric community was deeply divided over the fate of Timothy Caldwell. Some doctors clung to the belief that even the most damaged child could be healed, while others, like Dr. Samuel Harding, saw something in Timothy that defied hope. A uniquely intelligent and pathologically dangerous mind, devoid of empathy. Harding, unwilling to relinquish responsibility for the boy he had first diagnosed, volunteered to accompany him to the Missouri State Hospital for the Insane, and remained for 3 months to help the staff understand what they were truly dealing with. A case study in manipulation, Timothy wasted no time adapting to his new environment. He quickly learned the behavior that medical staff wanted to see: sorrow, remorse, gratitude, and performed it flawlessly. To many on the hospital staff, he appeared to be a boy recovering from trauma, eager to reform. But Harding, watching carefully, saw a different truth. Timothy wasn't healing, he was learning. He cataloged human emotions like an entomologist, classifying insects, mimicking them with uncanny precision, while remaining emotionally untouched himself. Harding's reports described a boy capable of simulating normalcy with terrifying skill. The subject displays remarkable cognitive abilities coupled with a complete absence of genuine emotional response. He has learned to simulate normal human reactions with sufficient skill to deceive casual observers. Extended observation reveals the performance to be entirely artificial. Timothy understood emotions as tools. Happiness as a way to prolong a desired outcome. Sadness as a means to invite sympathy. But he felt neither. More disturbing were the conversations he began to initiate once he believed he had won Harding's trust. Under the guise of scientific curiosity, Timothy began outlining ideas for future experiments. Experiments that went far beyond his earlier crimes. He proposed tests designed to examine human responses to pain, betrayal, and isolation. His plans were disturbingly methodical and showed an intuitive grasp of psychological and physical torment. If allowed to mature, Harding wrote, he would likely become one of the most dangerous individuals in American history. Unexplained incidents inside the hospital. Over the months that Timothy remained at the institution, a series of strange deaths and injuries began to ripple through the patient population. Elderly patients who had interacted with Timothy died suddenly of heart failure, despite being in previously stable condition. 2 younger patients were seriously injured in apparent accidents. Both had fallen in areas Timothy had passed through earlier the same day. Even more unsettling were the reports of Timothy appearing silently at night, beside other patients' beds, watching them sleep. Staff members began reporting nightmares and feelings of being constantly watched. 2 attendants requested transfers, citing a deep unease that intensified whenever Timothy was present. The Cipher Journal. Dr. Martha Fitzgerald, brought in to assist with Timothy's treatment, was the first to uncover the full depth of the boy's deception, after authorizing him to keep a journal for therapeutic reflection. She discovered that the childlike entries were actually encoded messages, using ciphers and hidden patterns. Timothy recorded not his path to rehabilitation, but a detailed surveillance log of hospital operations, staff behaviors, security protocols, and emotional weaknesses he had identified in his caregivers. Day 47. One decoded entry read, "Dr. F believes my tears during today's session were authentic." Her response pattern indicates increased sympathy and reduced suspicion. Estimate 3 more weeks of consistent performance required to establish sufficient trust for physical contact during sessions. The discovery triggered immediate lockdown procedures. Timothy's access to staff and privileges were curtailed, but he adapted. He began analyzing escape routes, gathering information, and exploiting minor policy exceptions made by unsuspecting staff. Over time, those small favors, longer walks, unsupervised reading time changes in routine accumulated into opportunity. The escape. In the summer of 1868, Timothy Caldwell vanished. The official report claimed he escaped during a building transfer, slipping away despite constant supervision. But Harding believed the truth was far more disturbing. He spent a year and a half studying that facility and its personnel, Harding wrote. By the time he made his move, he understood the psychology of every person who worked there better than they understood themselves. His escape wasn't an act of desperation. It was the culmination of a carefully executed plan. In the days that followed, subtle signs confirmed Harding's fears. Guards admitted to bending rules for Timothy in small ways. Nurses had unintentionally provided tools or access. Timothy's months of study had paid off not in healing, but in perfecting his next escape. The shadow left behind. Timothy's body was never found. No confirmed sightings were made in the days after his escape. But over the years, strange incidents began to surface across the Midwest. A child matching Timothy's description was seen in towns where suspicious deaths occurred, accidents too carefully staged. Animals mutilated with precision, victims, always someone who had taken in a wandering boy. Dr. Harding, unwilling to abandon the search, spent the rest of his life tracking these reports. He created a private archive filled with detailed accounts of events he believed bore Timothy's signature. He found patterns, remote locations, intelligent children with eerie emotional control, unexplained deaths that authorities refused to connect. Harding's final journals, discovered after his death in 1891, were filled with hundreds of pages of theories, maps, and grim speculations about Timothy's development and future. Harding's central question remained unanswered. Was Timothy Caldwell a tragic anomaly born without the capacity for empathy? Or was he the first visible sign of something even more disturbing? A type of evil that wears the face of a child, learns from its mistakes, and grows stronger with every victim it studies. The legacy of Timothy Caldwell. A case that changed everything. The story of Timothy Caldwell didn't end with his escape, it only deepened. In the years and decades that followed, his case continued to haunt the fields of criminal justice, child psychology, and psychiatric medicine. The implications were too profound to ignore. A child who had deceived trained professionals, manipulated an entire community, and committed premeditated murder without remorse had forced an uncomfortable reckoning. What if evil wasn't always taught or acquired? What if it could be born? A shattered home and a silent town. After their recovery, Thomas and Sarah Caldwell abandoned the farm. The trauma of nearly dying at the hands of the nephew they had tried to raise was too great. Neither could live with the memories embedded in those walls. The house, once full of labor and life, fell into decay and was eventually claimed by the county. Developers purchased the land in the 1890s, but locals kept their distance. Stories of what had happened there, the quiet boy with a polite smile and dead eyes, were passed down in hushed tones. Children were warned not to play near the ruins, and even adults avoided the area. The cave where Timothy had conducted his early experiments was sealed shortly after his arrest, but it remained a site of grim legend. Some said the ground was cursed, that no animal would graze near it. Others believed the cave still held something, memories perhaps, or echoes of suffering that refused to rest. The journals that endure. Dr. Harding's journals, meticulous, clinical, and unsettling, were donated to the Missouri Historical Society in 1923 by his daughter. She believed their academic value outweighed the horror they contained. They now sit in a restricted archive, accessible only to qualified researchers. Scholars have used them to trace the early development of forensic psychiatry and the first documented case resembling what we now recognize as childhood psychopathy. Harding's observations were decades ahead of their time. He chronicled a mind that could not feel but could mimic. A child who could study others with scientific rigor and manipulate them with chilling ease. His work laid the foundation for later theories of sociopathy and the notion that evil in rare cases may not be a product of environment, but of design. The disappearance that became a shadow. Even after his escape, Timothy's shadow lingered. Harding spent the last years of his life tracking incidents across the Midwest. Strange deaths, animal mutilations, disappearances, all linked by one chilling detail. The presence of a strangely articulate, seemingly kind young man with unusually mature insight. These cases were circumstantial, always just out of reach of confirmation. But the pattern was there for anyone who dared to see it. Timothy would have grown stronger, more practiced, more cautious. By the time he reached adulthood, he would no longer be the pale boy with hollow eyes. He would be a man, intelligent, composed, and completely invisible to anyone who wasn't looking hard enough. Final Reflections from a Haunted Mind. Dr. Harding's final journal entry, written just days before his death in 1891, remains one of the most unsettling post-mortem evaluations in American psychiatric literature. I have spent 24 years trying to understand what Timothy Caldwell represented, and I fear I have reached a disturbing conclusion. Timothy was not an aberration. He was a glimpse into what human beings might become when stripped of the moral and emotional constraints we consider fundamental to our nature. If he survived to adulthood, then somewhere in America, there walks a man who understands human psychology better than any trained professional, who can manipulate people with supernatural skill, and who views the rest of humanity as nothing more than subjects for experimentation. This mystery shows us that evil can wear the face of innocence, and that our assumptions about childhood and human nature may be dangerously naive. An unfinished story. Thomas and Sarah Caldwell never spoke of Timothy again. They changed their names and lived in obscurity until their deaths. Sarah in 1889, Thomas in 1894. They had no children, no legacy but silence. Whatever they feared, they carried it with them to the grave. But the story of Timothy Caldwell is not truly over. It lives on in journals, whispers, and unanswered questions. Was he a singular anomaly, or the first known case of something far more frightening? Has he been forgotten, or has he simply learned to hide better? What do you think? Do you believe Timothy Caldwell's story ended with his escape? Or are there darker chapters still hidden in the shadows of history? Let us know in the comments below. If this story chilled you to the bone, share it with a friend who loves diving into true crime and historical horror. Hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more tales that explore the darkest corners of the human mind. Because some mysteries never fade. They just wait. See you in the next video. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.